Report from Guard Lieutenant Vesmar to his superior, Guard Captain Miller. 8th of autumn, year 122 of the Blessed Age, Blüdhafen. Sir, my investigation into the queer murders, disappearances and sightings that have happened in the last week have irrefutably yielded results, and I demand additional reinforcements and resources to find the roots of these mysteries and put an abrupt end to them. As of yet, exactly 14 bodies have been found, bearing the same signs of mutilation: scooped out eyes, depraved occult carvings, mostly on the torso, and incisions around all the major veins and arteries. All of these loathsome practices have always been done with great precision, and I refuse to believe that a singular madman would be capable of such a time-consuming feat in such a short span of time. That is not to mention that most of the bodies were found in the docks that, on your orders, remain an almost unpatrolled hive of loathsome indecency, which leads me to believe that our sample of corpses is but a fraction of the true amount. Your overindulgence on ignoring the docks is perhaps also why you ignored my previous reports about strange disappearances and sightings of horrid creatures. Many denizens of that filthy, disease-ridden hive claim that their family members disappeared from their beds in the middle of the night. The people were terrified and wouldn't talk to me until I forced them to, and even then I had the most quintessential suspicion that something was deliberately being hidden from me. The topic that evoked the most wrath in the interrogated citizens were the creature sightings. I managed to acquire no detail on their appearance or behavior, but only on the fear they caused in the ones who saw them. As you denied me any support in my investigation and lent me no additional guards, I was forced to take matters into my own hand and try to infiltrate the docks with only one of my fellow guardsmen. Our disguises were those of simple beggars, abundant in the area, and we observed anything that would lead us to the trail of the diabolical events. The day was uneventful, and we were only witnesses of the festering depravity that remained ignored, but by night we discovered something that should indicate the scale of the evil we are dealing with. We were ocular witnesses to a hooded congregation of at least 30 individuals, their signs of heresy proudly worn on their occult robes. The mob paced from one house to another, moving as if still sleeping, and a select few of them, carrying some ungodly scrolls with them, entered these houses. From each home, a new individual joined the congregation, as if forced to do so by some dark powers, and was given the same robes of their wretched order. We remained unseen on their tracks the whole night to see where their hideout was, and they all converged in an old and a rotten, forsaken warehouse. The trail ended there, but when I peeked inside the structure later, it was empty. All that remained was a single one of those devilish scrolls I mentioned earlier in my report. It was covered in indecipherable cacography and glyphs, but also mucus and strange, festering membrane of sorts that was certainly of otherworldly kind. With such a day and condemning evidence of apostasy and dark rituals, I dared to contact the Paladin chapter in our city to tell them of my findings. I sent them the scroll as proof and an object of study and translation, so that their understanding of the cultist threat growing in our city would surpass your ignorance, and things could be handled once and for all. After the translation was cursorily completed and horrid rituals of eldritch origin were found among the glyphs, I was given an ultimatum by the Order. If their hideout of this cult is not found and eradicated in 3 days, and if their leader is not captured within a week, the Paladin Order will begin a full purge on the squalid streets of the docks. And that is why I demand additional reinforcements and resources, so it does not have to come to that. If you choose to remain inactive, the resulting loss of lives will be on your hands, sir, and I will make sure the populace of the city will know of that. Your loathing of me might be abundant, Captain, but let it not cloud your judgment about this matter, as I believe that this corruption is greater than we think. In the years following the Blüdhafen massacre, this report was censored, restricted, and archived. This remains the only original copy and can only be accessed by scholars and clergy, whose faith in Zutar is deemed unshakable. Transcribe interrogation of a detained cultist, led by Guard Lieutenant Vesmar. 9th of autumn, year 122 of the Blessed Age, Blüdhafen. You have been found guilty of participating in murder, Possession of magical items and heresy of the highest order. Your execution is inevitable, but your cooperation might make your death much quicker and more painless than it needs to be. Tell us where we can find your leader and your other hideouts, and you shall be mercifully put to an executioner's sword this very morning. Withhold information, and your endurance to pain shall be put to the test. If even then you refuse to talk, you shall be sent to the Paladin Order, where they will use their own methods of extracting secrets. Sir, please, I don't know anything. It's like I've awoken from a dream. I had these horrible visions and nightmares. I was alone in the vast black emptiness, and that thing appears. It was watching me. I couldn't do anything but to freeze in its gaze. I tried to look away, but it was everywhere. It was getting closer and closer and faster, but it was getting to me from everywhere. I felt like I was falling towards it, like when you jump from a great height and you feel the force in your belly as you are approaching the surface, but instead of landing, you just grow closer and fall faster, but you never reach land. Sir, please help me, please, Stop with this madness. You think I haven't heard such things before? Each one of you lot were tested to see if you were controlled by arcane means, and none of you showed signs of magical interference. You want to tell me it was divine powers that compelled you to murder and cavort with evil? How dare you defile Zutar in such a way? I would never willingly betray Zutar's name, I promise. I would tell you everything I know if I could, but I don't remember anything. But please, I just want to go home. Let's say that I believe you. Now what can you tell me? Are you from the docks? No, sir, I'm from the Brewers District. I haven't been to the docks for at least a year, sir. What day was it before you forgot? 6th of autumn, sir. That's quite recent. Tell me, was there anything strange in the district? Any strange rumors? Any suspicious behavior? Any dangerous individuals treading the night? Nothing, sir. Everything was completely ordinary. There were some rumors, of course, but I had not held them up to anything. There were no talks of these cultists skulking around, kidnapping people and doing rituals. You say that you have awoken just prior to the interrogation, yes? Yes, sir. I don't remember anything after I went to sleep that day, except for those nightmares, of course. Yet you know we are talking about cultists and disappearances, and dark rituals. Things I believe I haven't mentioned once. I can... How do you know of these things? Answer me! Please don't, I don't know. Not again. Mercy, please. What mercy? The one you have shown to the victims of your depravities. If there is any human decency in you left, tell me where your leader is, so that this madness can stop. Otherwise you are wasting my time, and there is no further point in this interrogation. Perhaps torture will make you remember. The interrogated starts mumbling inaudibly and spasmodically shaking. He's coming. We are but servants, we are chosen, we are rewarded, we are blessed. What in Zutar's name is happening here? The interrogated seems to be going through a trance of sorts. There is foam at his mouth, and his joints seem to dislocate across his whole body. His limbs are getting longer, and his face starts concaving into itself. The dreamer has awoken. Embrace him. Everyone get away from that thing, and get some more guardsmen here before its chains break. This transcript was later found in an unrecognizable heap of flesh and blood that used to be the body of the appointed scribe. The Cult of the Dreamers Case File, Volume 8, Case Closed, 18th of September, year 122 of the Blessed Age, Blüdhafen. The latest information gained during the last 2 days of the investigation proved crucial to ending the threat of the Cult of the Dreamer. After a full translation of the cultist rites, and due to the few unfortunate interrogation incidents that had happened in the first days of the investigation, It was found out that some of the cultists might only be mind-controlled innocents, even though paladin inspections found no magical residue, meaning the mind control was not arcane in origin. In a few cases, trying to disrupt the mind control resulted in dangerous incidents. All of those who were successfully released from their delirium were purged by the Paladin Order to ensure that they haven't fallen victim to the corruption. Those capable of speech and thoughts were afterwards questioned about what they had remembered, and their recollections only confirmed the suspicion that the roots of the cult were concentrated in small layers all over the city. Finding and dealing with them all would be almost impossible task without any further intel. Upon hearing these news, Duke Marion Lavalle was about to put the city districts into lockdown, order a curfew, and let soldiers methodically sweep through every household, but Guard Lieutenant Viesmar, who had been leading the investigation into the cult, requested the Duke to give him 1 day, and that he would find the location of these lairs, and his soldiers would then attack these cultist dens without harming civilians. Lieutenant's request was granted, and in the next few hours, all cultists that were still under the effects of mind control were questioned, declared innocent, and let free. Lieutenant Viesmar then ordered his men to discreetly observe them and to report all of their movements, especially in the night. Without a single exception, all of these mind-controlled individuals left their homes after dusk, and were then seen to be congregating in various buildings across the city. Upon receiving reports about all of the observed victims, Lieutenant Viesmar relayed the information to the Duke, and large assaults were ordered at once against all of the reported locations. The night ended in dozens of deaths and captures, but most details remain unknown, as reports from the assaulting soldiers were often very chaotic, and it would seem that what they had seen in these dens proved scarring to their minds. Perpetrators who were accustomed to the dark rituals and who were consciously behind the mind-controlling rites were interrogated and tortured to find all the remnants of the cult, and soon the cult of the Dreamer was all but eradicated. The Duke and the Paladin Order were appeased and believed that while some cultists might still have escaped justice, they will be caught eventually. Guard Lieutenant Viesmar was commended for his initiative concerning the cult, but was also stripped of active guard duty for disobeying orders, blackmailing a superior, and disregarding authorities. After he ignored the order not to continue in the investigation into the cult, believing that there was something that eluded everyone's sight. On the very same night, however, Lieutenant Viesmar was ambushed in his bed by a lunatic wielding a queer occult dagger. He managed to overpower his assailant, but not without suffering very severe wounds that do not seem to heal properly. The very next day, it was found out that most of the mind-controlled citizens were suddenly cured of the symptoms of mind control, and once properly examined, they were deemed fit to return to society. Lieutenant Viesmar was hastily reinstated back into active duty, and Guard Captain Miller was relieved of duty instead for endangering the populace. The strange dagger of meteoric iron and strange embedded gems of unknown cosmic origin was deemed dangerous and taken by the Paladin Order for safekeeping so that it would never fall into wrong hands. Unless further intel is received, the Cult of the Dreamer case is considered closed. Addendum by Knight Captain Dietrich Menge, 12th of March, year 123 of the Blessed Age. All mentions of the dagger in this volume and all its copies must be erased. We must not repeat the same mistakes again. Report to Emperor Thaddeus Rex concerning the Blüdhafen Massacre by Guard Lieutenant Viesmar, 11th of March, year 123 of the Blessed Age, Blüdhafen. Your most esteemed Holiness, as per your orders, I have written a recollection of the events as I saw them through my very own eyes. I believe that my direct involvement in both the massacre and the events that preceded and directly or indirectly caused it will allow some much-needed light to be shed on the mystery. I preemptively apologize for any vulgarities and low-born language, as my studiousness alone cannot deny my origin. First thing that needs to be known is that whilst most consider it two separate, unrelated events, the cult of the Dreamer case and the massacre itself are two halves of the same whole. Had we been more careful and less lenient, it all could have been avoided. All those who are privy to the knowledge hidden from the public blame the tenebrous, accursed dagger for all the evil that had been done that day. But unlike them, I am of the thought that the dagger was but a potent catalyst that only hastened something that would come sooner or later. No, we opened the gates of evil when we decided that all of those who were once under the control of dark powers would be let back into society without supervision, believing that there wasn't something nefarious and unseen still skulking in their minds and bodies. I have to confess, my Emperor, I had on many occasions found the drastic measures of the Paladin Order detestable, and I was contented that the late Blüdhafen chapter was what I had considered more reasonable. But now I see that what I had seen as ruthlessness was instead prudence. These connections might not be important to the grander scale of things, but I believe you would want to know of them, because if this corruption were to appear again, with this information it could be crushed before it does any harm. In the following words, I'll try to my best memory, retell the events as they had happened, in hope that they will never happen again. It was on 29th of February that it all happened. I was in temporary command of the city guard, before a new guard captain was to be elected. The cult of the Dreamer was all but gone, but we were still recovering from the damage they had caused, and from the severe winter that was about to end soon. It was then that I had received a cryptic message from a member of the Blüdhafen Paladin chapter. It was strange, because the Paladins had stopped telling me anything for months, and the only inside information I had was that a group of Paladins from the Sonnendorf chapter were on their way here to take it to the capital. The message was short, urging me to meet the man at night near the western city gate. I was to come discreetly, alone, and armed. Ignoring that tingling feeling of dread and uneasiness, I waited until nightfall and went to the meeting place. When I arrived, my contact was there. Were it not for the attributes of his order, I would never have assumed this malnourished raving creature a member of the Paladin Order. When he saw me, he quickly grabbed me by the shoulders and started rambling like a lunatic. Even though his visage and behavior were those of a madman, I quickly realized that whilst his mind and body were obviously tormented, there was very lucid clarity and purpose in his eyes. He was frightened and kept checking if we are truly alone. I didn't understand everything he was saying, and he was often very quickly repeating the same words and phrases, but his overall message was clear. I don't have much time. The chapter has fallen, the seals have been broken, the gate has been opened, it has begun. The city is under siege. Warn the Duke, make him rally the garrison, and call for help. Take this to him, he will understand. With those words, he handed me his holy book. The book was covered in a mass of writhing, moving flesh, and the holy sun symbol on it was replaced by a giant yellow gibbous eye. An eye that was looking right through my soul. It was very difficult to avert one's gaze from the eye, as the longer you looked at it, the more it drew you in and encompassed everything you saw around you. I managed to muster the necessary strength to tear my tabard and cover the book with it, but I was still horrified by this display of devilry. The paladin, whose willpower I now greatly respected, started twitching in agony. I tried to help him, but he shoved me away with a menacing growl. Suddenly, he drew a dagger and stabbed towards me, but before the strike connected, he led the strike away with his other hand, almost as if fighting against himself. He then forced the dagger into my hand and begged me to kill him, saying that he could feel something taking over and that he didn't want to end like the others. Seeing the state he was in and the urgency of the situation, I understood that this was not the time for senseless sentiment, and with a prayer to Zathar, I cut his throat as quickly and painlessly as I could. Understanding the direness of the situation, I started running towards the Duke's keep, but I had to make it through the whole city to get there. And though going around the Paladin Cathedral in the center of the city was the fastest route, I assumed that it would be too dangerous. I emerged from the dark alleyway and saw the beginning of what was to come. The main street was littered with corpses, smoke and fire were enveloping the city in the distance, and I could hear screams of horror and shrieks of murder in the distance. And above it all, like a cyclopean monument of evil, visible from any point in the city, stood the cathedral, no longer the pristine symbol of purity and faith, but a black menacing structure illuminated by the wretched fires of the consumed parts of the city. For a moment I thought of the book at my side and had a vision. I could see the cathedral covered in the same mass of flesh and gore as the book was, but above the utmost spire of the structure I could see the giant glowing yellow eye as well, looking over the city with a cosmic otherworldly purpose. The vision faded in just a blink, but I believe it wasn't just my fantasy, as in the following hours this vision would become reality. The Blüdhafen massacre had begun. Chronicles of the Blessed Age, The Blüdhafen Massacre Volume 1, written by Royal Chronicler Voyen of Sivas, 21st of June, year 150 of the Blessed Age, Sonnendorf. The Blüdhafen massacre remains to this day a bloody stain on the history of our great empire, but it is also a reminder of our resolve and faith. This dreadful event began in the eve of the 29th of February, in the year 123 of the Blessed Age, and it remains one of the most terrible atrocities that have happened in the last 150 years of divine rule. The citizens of Blüdhafen were awakened from their sleep in this horrible night by blood-curdling screams of terror and by the bright light of fires. It is not known from whence they came, but the entire city was overrun with horrible monsters and abominations that were slaughtering everyone they came upon, and turning them into twisted indescribable perversions of their former selves. More than half of the city guard and soldiers were killed in the first hour of the attack, as no one was prepared for an attack of such a scale and nature from inside the city. Everyone hoped that Duke Marion de Val would open the gates of his keep and begin securing the city one district after another, but after the initial wave of monsters had slaughtered many of his soldiers, he retreated into the castle with his remaining men-at-arms. The surviving forces inside the city were scattered and disorganized, and the only resistance came from small, separate groups of individuals that tried to save as many people as they could and fortify themselves in secure position. During this darkest hour, unlikely alliances were made to fight an enemy willing to destroy all. Many citizens were saved due to the bravery of greedy mercenaries, untrustworthy adventurers, and ostracized non-humans, proving that despite our differences, we are united in our faith in Zuthar and in our Emperor. But two names come from this event spoken louder than others: Guard Lieutenant Wiesmar of Blüdhafen and Knight Captain Dietrich Menge, without whom the city, and perhaps the entire kingdom, would have fallen. It was reported by many witnesses that Wiesmar of Blüdhafen ignited the first spark of hope the citizens of the city so desperately needed. As the city guard barracks was one of the first locations to fall to the monsters, it was assumed that he had died in the crushing first wave, as he was missing both before and after the attack. That's why it was such a shock when he was found by a group of his guardsmen who were trying to save as many innocents as possible, cutting his way through the monsters alone, heading towards the Duke's keep. It is rumored that when told about the castle's gates being shut, The lieutenant cursed the Duke for cowardly letting thousands of civilians die, a curse apparently so righteous and just that Zuthar himself paid heed to his words. Upon hearing of this, the lieutenant asked his men to follow him, saying that together they would gather any survivors they find, and they will hold on for as long as possible. And so this small group, led by Lieutenant Viesmar, charged against the currents of darkness and tried not to get swept away by the tendrils. It is said that this company of heroes killed hundreds of abominations in their righteous fury, and for every inch of footing they secured, more survivors joined them in their fight. Those incapable of fight tended to the wounded and took care of any supplies that were found along the way. But once this legion of faithful became larger, the small confines of the city streets shifted from tactical advantages to gruesome meat grinders, and it was decided that they shall move to the market square, where they will make their final stand until the last one of them has fallen. Using anything at hand, a wooden encampment of sorts with a vast pyre in the middle was built in the middle of the square. This pyre served a purpose both metaphorical and literal. It was a rally to all the survivors in the city that they are not alone, and served a single point of light against the endless waves of darkness. Small cells of skilled individuals were still being sent deeper into the city to save others, but it was obvious that if the life and soul of the city were to be extinguished, it would be here. But no matter the bravery and dedication of the defenders, it was obvious to all that these measures only delayed the inevitable, for the horrendous stream of new abominations coming from the wretched wicked cathedral of the Paladin chapter was unending. Their only chance was to endure and hope. We still do not know what they had really hoped for. Was it salvation and help? Or did they wish for a swift, uncorrupted death? Chronicles of the Blessed Age, the Blüdhafen Massacre, Volume 2, written by Royal Chronicler Voyen of Sivas, 21st of June, year 150 of the Blessed Age, Sonnendorf. The resistance against the dark forces occupying Blüdhafen was now mostly organized and united, but despite their faith and courage, they would succumb to the waves of darkness sooner or later. Many survivors believed that if they endured until dawn, the enemies would crumble under Zuthar's gaze. To their despair, dawn hadn't brought any reprieve from the night, for the horrors they faced shrouded themselves in pure darkness, and no light pierced their wicked aura. But the creatures alone weren't the source of this power. The Paladin Cathedral in the midst of the town, from whence the pure undiluted evil emanated, was now a horrifying and twisted structure of writhing flesh and non-Euclidean shapes. It was the cathedral that was producing the most primal aura of fear and despair, and stood like an imposing loathsome antithesis to the glorious sun, the light of which it absorbed and consumed. It is for this reason that we don't know for how long the survivors managed to endure, as time and light were no longer a constant during this abhorring siege. But by all accounts, they held on for at least 2 entire days. At the end of their desperate struggle, the defenders were exhausted, their numbers dwindling, their supplies running out. Guard Lieutenant Viesmar of Blüdhafen led the defense, and without him, they would have succumbed much earlier. He refused to give up, as the lives of thousands of civilians were depending on him, and both he and his forces were ready to give up their own lives for another hour of fleeting hope. But then suddenly, the attacks stopped. The defenders hoped that perhaps a dent was finally made in the enemy's numbers, a thing that was deemed impossible. but it was soon revealed that this was just a short calm before an oncoming storm of destruction, as the first indescribable behemoths of corruption appeared from the lost streets of the city. The survivors realized that the abominations were just amassing their forces for one final attack, one they couldn't possibly survive. The eldritch leviathans went through the lines of defenders like a knife, and a retreat and regroup were soon ordered. It was just minutes before the monsters massacred their way to the innocent citizens hiding in that haphazard fort of wooden palisades and began slaughtering them. Men, women, children, elders, humans, dwarfs, elves, all grabbed whatever weapon they had at hand and joined the defenders in their futile last stand against the darkness. Encircled, outnumbered, trembling, standing back to back and staring to the horrid faces of the twisted eldritch terrors. This was the twilight of Blüdhafen's desperate resistance. But as they stood against the chaos, the survivors noticed that disarray was now going through the enemy ranks. Many of them started rushing away from the battlefield towards one of the city gates. The brave champions of courage didn't even dare to hope, but then a single tone pierced the putrid air, a sound that suddenly restored the defenders' strength and resolve, the sound of a clarion. From the Journal of Knight Captain Dietrich Menge, 15th of March, year 123 of the Blessed Age, Blüdhafen. Our journey to Blüdhafen to retrieve the dangerous magical dagger, guarded by the paladin chapter, was supposed to take us approximately 2 weeks. We were to make our stops in various small towns and villages to resupply and rest, and to contact and visit the paladin chapters in Forley and Voljo to find out about any news in the area. However, upon receiving the letter from the Blüdhafen chapter, I became burdened with suspicions. I suspect it was Zuthar's divine intervention that guided my intuition, but the message left me with great unease. I was of the opinion that their chapter handled the entire cult ordeal very badly, and they were too carefree with their study of the corrupting dagger. With Knight Commander's blessing, I decided to take more than twice the requested amount of men, and limited our stops on the journey to only the most necessary ones, so that we may arrive to the city as soon as possible. Even accompanied by no less than 4 dozens of my paladin brothers, the closer we grew to Blüdhafen, the more grew the feeling of sourness and apprehension I was afflicted by. It was on the night of 1st of March that the lights of the city appeared on our horizon, but there was something wrong with the image. Even though shrouded in strange unnatural darkness, there was no mistaking the revelation that those were not fires of torches and lanterns, but those of destruction. We quickly urged our horses into a gallop to find out what had happened and what we could do to aid the citizens. As we approached, however, we noticed that there was something more sinister than fire at hand in the city. The chapter cathedral was malformed and infested by some hideous powers, and screams and sounds of battle were heard from inside the city walls. We arrived to the city gate and found a mass of depraved and mutated figures, shambling around the streets and making their way towards the market square. We made our way through these beasts until we reached the square, where we saw a huge group of survivors encircled by these murderous creatures. Still on horseback, we charged into the enemy's back lines with our full force, and we started trampling and cutting them down in dozens. Great anger and anguish consumed my mind when I realized that some of these twisted abominations used to be my brothers, and were trying to kill these civilians with desecrated artifacts of our holy order. The enemy wasn't prepared for our assault, and we swiftly eradicated a vast bulk of their forces. and made some breathing room for the surviving defenders. It was there that I met the leader of the resistance, Guard Lieutenant Wismar of Blüdhafen, and I was told of what had happened there. It was made clear to me that we may have pushed the monsters back, but as long as the cathedral was standing, new creatures would be pouring from it. The lieutenant made a good impression on me, and I saw that we were of the same mind. We needed a direct attack at the heart of this corruption. The corrupted abominations we fought reminded me of undead in a way, and from my experience, mindless creatures of this kind often do not survive once the catalyst or source of their power and animation is destroyed. It was obvious that my paladin powers were of great effect against them, and so even with overwhelming numbers, a group of us could make our way through their ranks and end this once and for all. It is from these miscalculations that I should take example. I thought the enemy similar to undead, and presumed that fighting them would be no different. I ignored the nuances and relied too heavily on my holy powers to be devastating against these foes. Had I taken some more time to analyze and think about these opponents, perhaps more of my brothers could have survived. We paladins exist to protect the ordinary folk from the ever-changing arcane and occult powers, and fighting like an inadaptable blunt instrument only weakens us. Perhaps only being taught how to fight magic and monsters, but not understanding how magic works, is an archaic approach that needs to be changed. I will share these thoughts with the Knight Commander when I return to Suddendorf. But let's return to the massacre. I ordered 20 of my paladins to stay with the survivors and help against the onslaught, while I, Wismar, and my remaining knights would strike at the cathedral. We used the window of opportunity created by our cavalry charge to quickly make our way to the former place of worship. We fought some enemies on our way there, but they proved no challenge to our organized righteous wrath, and soon we were standing before the gates of the blasphemous building where this nightmare began. Had I known what we would find there, even Sutar himself couldn't convince me to enter the wretched place. I will not describe what happened there in hope that the knowledge of this event will die with us. Some scars can afflict more than a body, and some things should remain unknown and forgotten.
On the Blüdhafen anomaly, a study by Arcanist Tavern, written in the year 142 of the Blessed Age. It has been almost 20 years since a great tragedy that is laconically known as the Blüdhafen Massacre, but its enigma has been haunting the scholarly community to this very day. It was an incident without precedent, and the deeper we investigate it, the less we understand. In general, there are only very few accounts of what really happened, but trying to get to the core of the problem is practically impossible, as only 2 individuals survived and witnessed the climax in the Paladin Cathedral: Duke Wismar of Blüdhafen and Knight Commander Dietrich Menger, both of whom remain adamant about remaining silent on the matter. Most of the scholarly community, me included, reached the conclusion that due to many factors, the mystery is so obfuscated that trying to elucidate it would be a waste of precious time. Up until recently, that was the consensus, but a few months ago I noticed that strange rumors began circulating among my colleagues. Apparently, the huge crater that now embellishes the area where the Grand Paladin Cathedral and its surroundings used to stand is now the source of a very eerie phenomenon. I, as one of the few in our empire who, on a theoretical level, understands magic and arcane, thought that such a rumor is worth investigating, and I made my way to the port city of Blüdhafen. Even though I knew what to expect, the black crater in the center of the city and the black ominous remains of the cathedral and its surroundings took me by surprise. I always assumed that it was something akin to a giant explosion that destroyed the cathedral, but it didn't look like any explosion I have ever seen. The edges and walls of the crater were perfectly smooth and even more intriguing were the houses. They were not destroyed by the explosion as I thought originally, but instead they looked like something took a great even bite out of them. The edges of the houses were black as if from fire, that's true, but they weren't charred or burned. It was more like they changed into obsidian without a single dent and imperfection. Even here on the edges of the crater I could feel something strange emanating from the middle and something being wrong with my senses. I, for the love of Zutha, couldn't grasp what was wrong, but then it hit me. It was the silence. I couldn't hear a single sound from the outside while I was here. No birds, no murmur, no sounds of the city, only me and my heartbeat. And every sound I made only sounded like a distant echo. My eyesight was playing tricks as well, always seeing something in the corner of my eye, but nothing was ever there when I turned my head. I also looked like I was seeing double, for whenever I moved my hand, I could see the blur of my movement, an effect similar to the ones caused by various fungi and herbs. I decided to place my apparatus for arcane research here, so I could find if there is any magical residue here, or perhaps if some spell is still in effect. Everything was negative, even things that weren't meant to be. This entire place was devoid of magic, and not just the synthetic magic left by spells, but the small traces of natural flowing magic that should be found everywhere were not here either. It was like this place didn't exist, devoid of sound, devoid of life, devoid of magic. For all intents and purposes, this place was dead. I thought about the events of the massacre and tried to find some conclusion as to why this place is how it is, but I can only theorize. Considering that out of the powerful attack force that attacked the cathedral and destroyed the source of the evil, only two survived the events, it can be assumed that some kind of battle took place here. Normally I would assume that this was the result of a powerful life-destroying spell, but that would not explain the other abnormalities. Perhaps the paladins used their powers and lives to create a colossal magic dispel, but again, something didn't compute. My last theory is the most implausible one, but also one I personally find most likely. As is known, the city was overrun by so many monsters that no one had any idea where they came from. It was only known that they came from the cathedral. This could mean that they came here from a different plane of existence or reality, one that works differently than the ones we know of. What if either due to sheer number of summons, or due to deliberate effort by some higher entity, the entire place was supposed to become a permanent gateway into a different plane of existence, but the process was stopped before it could finish, and so this place remains only a closed doorway that is neither here nor there. What if those shapes I see through the corner of my eye are the creatures on the other side, waiting for the doorway to open? Would that mean that the source of this corruption wasn't defeated but only sealed away? And would it mean that if I can see these shapes on the other side, they can see and observe us? What if they could see us the entire time? What if the wall between our realities isn't a wall, but a one-way mirror, a mirror imperfectly sealed, so that it may still be possibly penetrable by sounds and whispers?
A letter from Duke Vesmar of Blüdhafen to Knight Commander Dietrich Menge, deciphered 17th of January, year 143 of the Blessed Age, Blüdhafen. Dietrich, I too have read the studies of that scholar, and I as well am disturbed by his findings. From what I've heard, he was labeled delusional by his peers, but they haven't seen what we have. If you remember what a thing in the cathedral was capable of, Wouldn't it make perfect sense that it wanted to create a gateway between our world and some dark beyond? And wouldn't that explain from whence the dagger had come and why it wasn't in the cathedral? I agreed at getting the arcanist to examine it, under heavy supervision of course. We know what happened with the dagger, would be the best course of action, but alas, I bring bad news. Before I could contact this great scholar, that fool Montagnon provided him safe haven at his court and made him one of his court advisors. I don't hold any grudge against Montagnon, but he is the last person I want to deal with when concerning something occult. Damn that fool and his bloody curiosity. So getting the arcanist is no longer a sound option, and I won't trust some random researcher with such an important thing. So it seems that until something changes, we must continue to stay vigilant, for if that study is correct, then we can be certain that the things will return someday. But you know what gives me nightmares more than the creatures returning to our empire? Them appearing in neighboring lands. The Draconian war is taking its toll as it is, but what if in addition to that, the dwarves got corrupted by these eldritch powers? I hold no love for the dwarves, and our truce is barely holding as it is, but they at least take a brunt of the Draconian attacks. If their holds were to become these gateways to this eldritch dimension the scholar talked about in his work, I don't even want to think about that. Maybe we should warn the dwarves and elves and others, but I fear that if they saw how terrified we are of these horrid entities, they might try to use them to their advantage, not heeding our warning of their terrible influence. Ever since our most holy emperor honored me, a lowborn, with the title of the Duke of Blüdhafen, I have tried to bring back and maintain order in the duchy. The city prospers, and it is now mostly inhabited by those who were not here during the massacre. Everyone acts like this accursed remnant of it that remains in the center of the city doesn't exist and everything is going as it should. But as long as that item is within the walls of my city, and I know almost nothing about it, I will never feel that my people are safe. With the help of the restored Paladin chapter, we've only uncovered little about what it does. This one doesn't seem to hold any corruptive mind-controlling influence, but even then, anyone who comes into contact with it is locked for at least a few months, without any physical encounters with anyone else, and is examined for any signs of indoctrination. The device cannot be damaged by any means we have at our disposal, it seems, and reacts to the so-called attunement process which your paladins explained to me. They told me that it looks like the item enhances their powers once they use them through the device, but that they do not fully understand. If that is so, perhaps that's why the explosion happened once you severed the connection between the gatekeeper and his device. It was full of his power and ready to be used, but then it lost the source and the power dispersed chaotically, resulting in that explosion. If that is so, I am even less cheerful of this item being in my city, seeing as it had already caused such devastation before, but I understand that it needs to be kept here. I know that your condition doesn't allow you to travel much now, but I hope we shall meet again soon. There are other things that need to be discussed that I won't entrust into a letter, no matter if it is ciphered or not. May Zutar be with you, friend. I believe we shall need him soon.
Found on the notice board of the Fishmont village. Small folk sovereignty, year 1380 post-liberation. Dear neighbours, a few days ago some weird weed started growing on me patch. I didn't dare to touch it as I had a bad feeling about it, and it could have been some kind of poisonous nettle. But when all the plants around it started dying, I decided that something needed to be done. I tried taking it out with a spade, but it had quite remarkably tough roots. At the end, I had to burn it down with a large part of my patch, but when I did so, it lets out some horrible black smoke and it severely damaged my right hand. I just wanted to post this notice here to tell you to be careful if it appears in your garden as well. Now, I don't want to sound like some lunatic, but I'm quite certain that this plant was anything but natural and had to be brought here somehow. Now, I don't want to accuse anyone, but I have a suspicion that it was them suspicious Empire folks who came here those almost 30 years ago. Refugees from Blüdhafen, they say. Refugees my ass, I say. I always had a bad feeling about them, and they have been nothing but trouble for the past 30 years. They live in that shack of theirs a few miles from the village, and there are always some weird nefarious rumors about what goes in there. I have bad dreams every time they come into the village for some reason, and I just don't trust people who wear hoods all the time. I know for a fact that most of the community here shares my opinion on these folks, and we have always tolerated their eccentricities, but I've just had enough. As long as I could ignore them, I couldn't care less if they were weird or not, but now I'm sure that they are somehow messed with my potatoes and it is personal. And looking back, isn't it strange that we've had such bad luck ever since they came here? Animals disappearing and dying, something weird happening with the well water, making it turn into a weird undescribable color. There was this one time Migo saw those weird flying caspid funguses and we made fun of him, but he disappeared the day after. All the sick and rotten fish that started appearing on the shores. Hells, I lost all my hair within a year of their coming and my eyes became somewhat yellowish. And don't forget all the nightmares we all seem to share at the end of March. It's all wrong. That's what it is, and I truly believe it was them. I don't know if they are criminals or some agents sent by the Empire to spy on us, but I think it is time to tell them we don't want them near our community anymore. I want anyone who shares my concerns to meet me tomorrow at noon in the Shadow's Mouth Inn, and we shall take our pitchforks and go tell those weird people how things are. From the Diary of Bublik Goodberry, Mayor of Fishmont, Small Folk Sovereignty, year 1380, post-liberation. I thought that things would settle down once we forced the Empire folk to leave, but it sure doesn't look that way. The weird, dangerous weed keeps growing, and there is something wrong going on with the fishes and the sea itself. If things keep going like this, I'm afraid that we will have to abandon Fishmont and relocate our community elsewhere. But how am I to break this to the neighbors? We've been living here for generations, and many of the farmers have their entire family's livelihoods dependent on the land that they have sowed for their entire life, just as their grandfathers and the grandfathers of their grandfathers. Them Empire folk might not have problems with moving elsewhere, with all them wars and problems and things, but we of the sovereignty have chosen this land because it is calm and peaceful, and we are not used to such hardship. But at least the young lads and lasses still keep smiles on their faces, even in these troubling times. They know nothing of how the world is outside the sovereignty, and they do not understand that some things are just purely evil and malicious. The most harmful things they know of are nettles and toadstools, and those are harmful only to those who know nothing about them. But their naivety troubles me a little, for they think these weeds and these strange dangerous occurrences around the village are of the same manner. I've seen many of the curiously wandering around the forests and trying to befriend these weird animals that started appearing, and they seem keen on finding out about this infestation. I've heard that some of them even conversed with the weird Empire folk before they moved out, and were against our intervention against them. I've even heard of some of them talking about wanting to become adventurers or alchemists or wizards. I understand that the young will always be curious before they come to their senses, but this is too far. But few lads in particular trouble me the most. They were the ones who befriended the Empire charlatans, and they called themselves their apprentices. I don't know what craft they believe to know, but it surely ain't anything good. Well, these apprentices now go around the village doing some parlor tricks, mainly to impress the lasses. But nothing good can come from it, I'm sure. They think that this infestation isn't a curse but a blessing that we do not understand, and that better times shall come soon. Well, I ain't convinced, and I'm suspicious of what these rascals want to do. But still, I know these boys since their birth, and I know that their hearts are good and pure. Misguided they may be, but I'm certain they would never do anything harmful. Perhaps I'm just old and morose, and seeing these young folk happy in these dark times just makes me remember my own youth. Perhaps better times really will come soon. Well, only time will tell. These are the ramblings of a madman who was found half dead where the disappeared village of Fishmond and its inhabitants used to be. He has vanished from his cell the night after uttering these final words of madness. The fiends of deeps have come and brought destruction. They rose at night under the shroud of stars from the putrid abyss that houses 1,000 eyes. The thing it slept and festered in deeps, but now awakened by those of lucid dreams, it embraced in its tendrils of fears, inviting the souls of those who knew naught but cheers unto the empire of corruption. The fortunate had their lives taken, their twisted bodies with alien mind would awaken and serve the dreamer whose nightmare for blessing the foolish have mistaken. Those who begged and cried would be enthralled under the blanket of stars and solace in the dream they were made to find. Their mind and the dreamers, one they are now, no joy, no love, no cheer, their hearts just a vessel of madness and fear. Dear Luna, my goddess, her journey like sight swing guided me through the hours of darkness, and as she upon the field of black ascends, her midnight embrace blinded the fiends of depths to my existence. Yet I could not escape the dreamer's gaze, and with fear and numbing blackness of my mind I had embraced. Providence had sealed my fate, as unseen to both minds and naked eye my body remained. Caressed by tendrils of the kindly kind, I awoke to the rays of morning, the light of which my eyes would blind, and my sanity once again had begun forming. But the land I found myself upon was not the land I knew for oh so long. It was black and scarred and sick and dark, and though I am sure of my own sanity, I at least hoped for a flicker of familiarity. But the land, the grass, the beasts, the farms were the ones I knew, but lacking all the cheerful charms. The scar on land and scar on soul are all that now remains. The houses, the folk, the meadows, the oaks, all but a memory that fuels my grieving veins. But I survived more than a scar of soul. On my body the horrors had also taken its toll. Yellow eyes, few white strands, rotten teeth, prolonged arms, frog-like hands, conjoined feet. Now I tell this tale in a prison of clay, for I tried to warn but was met with nay. A madman I am for saying the truth that doesn't the heart soothe. Every night I lay in my prison bed, I see the same visions of horror and dread. I know what lies beneath, I know what rules above. I know what dreams under our feet, what waits under the mud. They are awaking, they are awaking, they are awaking.
So that's all the story for now. If you like what we do, you can also find us on our website, link in the description, where we post all of our homebrew and other stuff, including collaborations with other various talented people. If you are feeling generous, you can also check out our Patreon, where we give various rewards for monthly subscriptions. To end this with, we would like to give an enormous thanks to all of our patrons. You guys are amazing. So that would truly be everything for now. Thank you all for watching, and we hope you'll be up for another round next time.